Good afternoon, my lords and my ladies. Welcome back to Bumblebee. Whenever we think of medieval times, we have this image in our head, a specific image. It's a castle, a king, and a jester dancing around while somebody gets their head cut off. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But what exactly did these funny looking guys do in the royal court? Well, I'm Taylor McWaters, and here are the top 10 messed up things in the life of a jester. Let's get silly. Kicking off the list at number 10. Farting around. In the earliest accounts of the Fool, going back to the 11th century, these fools were hired to liven up the party. Most of you may have an image of a jester in your head, and right now they're jumping around on tables, telling jokes, doing this shit. It's pretty accurate. It was one of the best jobs to have, this title of a minstrel or a fool. It was an honor to have, really. The fool's payment was anything but a joke. Roland Le Pétoire was rewarded with 30 acres of land from King Henry II as long as he showed up to court every year on Christmas Day to fart. To literally. He would whistle, jump around, and fart. Imagine eating beans on Christmas Day, having a nice time with your family, and then Roland jumps on the table and starts farting all in and around your beans. So gross. And then he leapfrogs over your head and then goes and heckles your aunts and uncles. I'd be upset. Christmas Day? What are you doing, man? I'm trying to eat beans. Roland the Farter was his nickname. How great is that? He would also whistle tunes in your face. Air would just come out of this guy from every hole. That's impressive. Number 9. Expert jugglers. I can't watch circus performers do anything. It makes me way too anxious. Seeing somebody like losing balance 50 feet above a crowd, they're like, my toes curl, I can't look. While some think of jesters as nothing but these drunk class clowns who would walk silly and talk sillier, they did some crazy stuff. Juggling was introduced early in the Fool's game, but like Romans getting bored of gladiators fighting, juggling just wasn't enough anymore. They had to raise the stakes. So jugglers began throwing swords, daggers, battle axes, anything you don't want above your head, jesters would juggle it in front of you while you're eating beans. While some can't watch juggling, others surely can't take their eyes off of it. This was used as an advantage in battle, believe it or not. Jesters would juggle knives, swords, whatever they could, but while they were doing it, they would talk smack to the kingdom's enemies. They would insult their enemy, basically roast them so hard that they break formation and would try and fight the jester at once. You're gonna fight Leapfrog Larry, who's juggling 6 swords at the same time? Good luck. They would literally chirp them until they left formation, and then at that time, the jester's like, go, I got him. Number 8. Key delivery. Being a professional comedian is hard work. You could say 1,000 hilarious, well thought out bits, but one ill-timed tweet that goes a little too far can ruin your entire career, apparently. Well, back in the day, being a professional fool was no different. You needed to find the balance of humor and wit, and it was harder back then, if anything, than it is now. Most of these jesters were given role of advisor to the king and queen. That's what makes them so important in history. The phrase, don't shoot the messenger, yeah, this is kind of where it comes from. The jester would have to tell them bad news, but in a positive way. For example, back in 1340, King Philip IV, his fleet was destroyed in a naval battle. The British just absolutely wiped them out. It was an otherwise devastating loss, but the jester brought this news in a positive way. He gave it a positive spin, rather. He said to the king, they didn't even have the guts to jump in the water like our brave French. Where if that was some random dude, his knees would be shaking. He has to tell the king all this horrible stuff, and he's not used to that. Jesters are used to farting on the king's lap. They're the ones to advise for sure. They're definitely the most comfortable with speaking ill truths. Number 7, bad news. Most of the time, jesters knew their way with words. They were royalty. They were smart, despite what their names make you believe. But sometimes the message couldn't be said with a grin or a pun. Sometimes the king would send these court jesters into battle first to deliver that first message. So no matter what the message was, this jester had to go and deliver it in his jester way. That was the whole point. They would tell a clown to be like, hey, go and tell them that we're gonna fight. And he'd be like, okay. Jesters were a treat, but they were also quite disposable, sadly. Sometimes the jester would kick off the entire battle, demanding the opposing side to retreat while roasting them at the same time. It was amazing. It makes sense though. What better way to start a battle? A jester runs across the battlefield. He's like, hey, the king said he doesn't want it anymore. He doesn't want the kingdom. You can have it. We're not even gonna fight. It's all good. It's all yours. Apparently the queen has something called ligma. Number 6, don't quit your day job. The life of a fool was fun and games, but certainly not all the time. They didn't party all day every day, okay? They weren't the group LMFAO. They had to sleep, they had duties to do. They performed the odd time, but on their off days when they're not juggling knives in front of children, they would tend to household duties, much more daunting than roasting the king in front of his family. They would be assigned to keeper of the hounds. Their hands were quite full during this clown downtime. They would have to travel to markets constantly to purchase livestock for the royal family. They fed the family and then entertained them. A true class act. On top of that, when it came to battle, jesters were the ones to hype up the army the night before. They would play music, tell stories, anything to boost morale. When it came to being on the actual battlefield heading towards battles, jesters would also ride across the front of their army, talking smack about the enemy, still trying to hype them up, even on the day. Number 5, business casual. Let's get one thing out of the way. Jesters did not dress like this all of the time. That would be amazing, but let's get real, that would be quite itchy. I don't know, all those tights, can't wash your stuff back in the day. I don't know, I didn't want to get into it. Handling the hounds while wearing jingle bells also, you'd be a walking, talking chew toy. Bad idea. They dressed like normal people, of course. Well, rather they dressed like their masters did. They were hired as businessmen who spoke with purpose, and then when the time came, they would lean into whatever skill they brought to the table, be it juggling, singing, playing music, whatever. Now, the attire of a jester is what we recognize the most. Their fit was pretty unreal. Their outfit was bright, usually to get attention, but jesters also wanted to dress as comedically as they could. They wore colors that didn't match well together. They wore odd layers overlapping each other, just flaps of jesterness coming off. It grabbed your eye mid-stew. Their headgear was also quite fun. The ears were supposed to be the ears of a donkey. The ears of an ass, rather. With bells, of course, because they're fun. Number 4, all around the world. Contrary to popular belief, the origins of a court jester did not begin with medieval castles or anything in the English days. They were around long before then. In ancient Rome, there were 4 types of jesters. There were Sanio jesters, who were pretty much mimes. They would make crazy facial expressions, their physicality was on point, they didn't wear masks or say words. Stupidest clowns, great name, did wear masks. They were the full-on clown package, all the ruffles, the hidden face, tall silly hats, big bellies, really creepy, terrifying. I don't like clowns. They would use their riddles to entertain, they would use their words, while the other guys just used their bodies. The Skura jesters were picked solely on their appearance. See, ancient Romans weren't as inclusive or well-mannered when it came to people looking different or having disabilities, so sadly they were hired on their oddities, to say the least. The 4th kind was moriones, is where we got the word moron from. They were the closest thing to our English jester that we have now. They would roast everybody, have a silly walk, a funny talk, and during the festival of Saturnalia, the shortest day of the year, these morons would be the lord of misrule. They would rule the day and tell everyone what to do. It was often a pretty silly time. Imagine an improv teacher doubling down as a dean for the day. Now you get it. Number 3, not a trickster. Tricksters, clown, and jesters are commonly mixed up, and honestly, that's totally fair. One has a nose that goes bonk, the other dances with jingle bells, and the other plays tricks. It's pretty much the same to us now in our modern days, but tricksters have an entirely different origin than jesters. Jesters came from ancient Roman times, tricksters from Norse mythology. Hermes, for example, in history, he was considered a trickster of his time. He was the messenger of the gods, who also just happened to invent lying. Not a good combo. So not only do they go against the rules of their kingdom, but they also go against our laws of physics for the most part. And this has us intrigued still to this day. We're bringing Loki, the trickster, to life. He's fighting the Avengers. He's on Loki season 2 on Disney+. It's still going. But back in Norse mythology, Loki was a shapeshifter who supposedly gave birth to Odin's horse. Must have hurt. Over time, the role of a trickster changed, and a lot of these fairy tales, we have trickster characters like Rumpelstiltskin, who'll, pop out of a bush and then make Shrek sign away the day he got married. They screw things up more or less. That's the trickster. Number 2. Jane Fool. One of the few female jesters in history. Here we go. We know about jesters enough now where we can move on to specific people from history. Like Jane Fool, for example. She was included in a royal family portrait. That's a big deal. She's in the background peeking through a doorway. That's pretty creepy, funny, and also pretty epic. She was never trained to be a jester per se, but she was born with the right idea of how to entertain. She was born a comic. She would say what was on her mind. She loved reminding the court that all men were fools before God. She liked to level people, bring them down off their, throne. She would say shit like that, She was great. She was close to King Henry VIII's wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Parr, and rumor has it, she was besties with Queen Mary I. The only person dressed as well as the Queen back then was Jane Fool. And finally, number 1, Stanchik. One of the saddest paintings of all time, that of the sad clown. Stanchik. The court jester was working under the command of Sigismund the Old in the early 1500s. Now he was one of the most famous jesters in Poland. He was employed by 3 different kings. Quite a big deal. So he never lost steam over time, but something did happen. He was considered one of the wisest, and one tale from his time has stuck with many historians. He was often upset with the king, specifically when Sigismund brought in a giant bear from Lithuania and then released it into the wild to later hunt. Sounds like a fun game, I guess. Or, play Guess Who. That works as well. But what happened was the bear ended up hunting the king and even took his queen off of her high horse. Literally, she fell off her horse, was attacked. It was kind of brutal. I don't want to talk about it. Stanchik straight up ran away after this point. He jingled into the night and then everybody talked about him. How could he? He just left. I could have never. He ended up defending his actions by saying it's a greater folly to let out a bear that was already locked in a cage. What a roast. A little roast and run. This painting shows the sad jester sitting next to news that the Smolensk has fallen to the Russians. The life of a clown is nothing but sadness, apparently. What a good note to end on. Guys, those were 10 messed up things in the life of a jester, but what else do you want to know from history? We've covered some lousy queens, some shitty kings. Comment down below and we'll bring it to your eyes. I've been your host, Taylor McWaters, and we'll see you next time on Bumblebee.